Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Event Insights. I'm Chrissy with Safe Events Global, and today I am joined by Robert Brown, who is the owner of Full Range Productions. As a bit of a word of warning, both Robert and I are recovering from coughs at the moment. So if you hear any raspiness or anything like that, just bear with us. So Robert is going to be talking to us today about accreditations and how they can really be the main component of any major event. If you think of any questions during Robert's presentation, just pop over to the Q&A section there on the chat, and we'll leave a little bit of time at the end to go through those. So Robert, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Chrissy. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, wherever you may be in the world. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to screen share. Let's see if I can get the technology to work here as expected. All right, there we go. I take it everyone can see the screen.
Perfect.
Okay. So again, as Chrissy said, my name is Rob Brown. I am the owner and manager of Full Range Productions. We're based here out of Washington, D.C. And so I really wanted to start off by thanking Safe Events Global, Chrissy and Mark Breen, everyone over there for not just hosting me today, but for hosting this entire series of events for folks. I find them very invaluable. I've attended multiple myself, and so I'm very happy to be a part of this and to be speaking about this with everyone here today. All right, we'll do the obligatory who am I and why am I here talking to you today? So again, my name is Rob Brown and I own and manage Full Range Productions. We are based in Washington, D.C. Most of my career has been either based here in D.C. or in New York City. I started out when I was in college doing audio production in the year 2000, so quite a while ago. And that's where I started out as an audio engineer. And then I moved after school, started working here in Washington, D.C. Being D.C. based, did a lot of concerts and festivals, but also a lot of campaigns and political campaigns. I was the A1 for a couple presidential events, and then one international campaign as well. But very much have a music and technical production background. From there, after about 7 or 8 years, I moved into more event management and account management, and then also found myself in the running industry after a couple of years of an avid runner myself. Found myself in the running industry, really working on volunteer management and race management for a couple different organizations here. From there, I then moved, my interest sort of peaked and started moving more towards the emergency management planning side of things. Here in the United States, we use the National Incident Management System and the Incident Command System, so NIMS and ICS. And so I know different countries have certainly different regulations around all of those, but those are our main sort of bodies of governing, of safety and emergency response. And then as they're doing more and more in the event space. And so I worked for an emergency management and disaster recovery company for a little while during the pandemic. And I've also been an expert witness on a couple different lawsuits as well. So, and also very much a proud member of the Global Crowd Management Association and Event Safety Alliance, and a member of the International Live Events Association as well. So that's sort of all of what I've done in a very brief snapshot. And so what I currently do, own and operate Full Range Productions. We really focus on accreditation, access control, and incident management planning, specializing in large outdoor events. So again, that is the career, that is the what. What I think is always very interesting for folks in this industry is the why. So why am I here? Honest answer is I just loved going to punk rock shows when I was a teenager, still do. But that's what got me into audio production and thinking that concerts were cool. And so from concerts moved into larger events. And I love being at events, being a part of events. I like the community participation and the connection of people in a group experiencing the same thing at the same time, all together. Like that's part of what it is to be a person, is to be in community with others. And that's something I think events, allow us to do in a way that nothing else really does. My why is actually sort of in two parts. That's sort of how I got started into the industry. And then the reason that I have moved more towards the incident management side of things for events is that I was at the Boston Marathon in 2013 when they experienced the bombing there. I was completely safe. I was completely fine. We had left the area about an hour, maybe about 45 minutes before the explosion happened. But me and a colleague had been sitting basically across the street from where it happened. And so that certainly changed the running industry, has started to change the events industry here in the United States very greatly. And we continue to see those sorts of tragic events, at live events, whether they're big or small. And so I really want to be a part of the solution to making events better and safer for everyone who attends them. So those are sort of my whys. I do want to do, again, another obligatory disclaimer. So all viewpoints here expressed are going to be solely my own. I'm not speaking for any other organization or company or sponsor or event or anything like that, just my own personal 2 cents. A lot of the examples I'm going to use here today are going to be anecdotes and amalgamations of experiences and events that I've seen across at other events to really make the sort of illuminate the point. But so I'm going to focus on really a broad stretch of things here. My approach with presenting this today is that I want to acknowledge with all humility, I don't know everything. I've done a lot of stuff in the events industry, but there's plenty that I don't know. Occasionally I've been wrong in my life. I'm sure I will continue to be so. And so this is all based on my experience, what I personally seen work and some of the things I haven't seen work. And so I really want to discuss the things that I think that I consider when I bring into an event, and then hoping that you can have those similar considerations and bring that back to your event, to your own unique circumstances. I'm sure I will use decisive language like you should or shouldn't do something. Really, most things do have a valid place in the industry, depending on the event, depending on the conditions. And so it's a matter of trying to find that right space. So most things are suitable at some point in time. I certainly won't be able to cover, oops, sorry about that. I just jumped slides a little bit. So I certainly can't cover everything today. I'm going to end up having to leave a lot off. And so that's really my approach here. I'm going to try to drill down on some really important things that I think are useful for everyone to think about. And then what I ask from you for your approach here is take what's valuable, leave the rest. Some things won't be relevant to you, and that's okay. Hopefully some things are. And so think about what I'm talking about, what I'm going through as sort of for the constraints for your event and how they apply there. And then how can you make your events better? What can I give you anything here that you can take back and make your event planning process, particularly around accreditation, a little bit more seamless? So I actually want to start off with a few things that I'm not going to cover today, just to help kind of narrow the focus in on what I am going to cover today. So I'm not going to talk about today stadiums and leagues and tours and corporate conferences and pardon, some of those ultra high security events. Nor am I going to talk about access control for vehicles or for parking. And I know stadiums and leagues, and they all seem like they're very similar to annual events and greenfield sites. I mean, the credentials, it's all the same thing, right? But I think some of the reason that tours are very different from annual events is that when you're planning the accreditation program for a tour, you really have a very long time horizon that you have to think about, and your venue changes from day to day, from week to week. So it's a little bit, the considerations that impact tours are going to be very different than the considerations that you might find at an annual event. And stadiums and leagues, frankly, just have a lot of infrastructure already built into place. If you have walls and doors that are always there, that's great. If you ever had to build, hundreds of yards of fence lines, it's nice. I'm very jealous of permanent doors sometimes. And there's just more infrastructure in terms of turnstiles and CCTV cameras, and just a much more robust security infrastructure that comes along with being a part of a stadium. Stadiums also have a lot of repeat staff, repeat vendors. There's a consistency there that you don't often get with annual events. If you're getting those folks together, once or 2 or 3 times a year, it's just a very different sort of training environment and learning curve for everybody who's going to be at an annual event. So what I am going to focus on for today is really annual events, particularly at greenfield sites and places where if you don't own your own venue, it's unique and maybe a non-traditional event space. How access control is sort of developed and thought of inside those spaces is really what I like doing and what I like to focus on. And so that's really what I'm kind of drill down, because I do think it has some complexities that are different than the other than stadiums and tours and whatnot. So with the greenfield and annual events sort of in mind, I did want to use the New York City Marathon as sort of an anchor event, in part for, I'll get into a couple of reasons why in a little bit, but wanted to think about one concrete example I could kind of bring this back to. Otherwise, I would have just been all over the place and talking about 1,000 different examples for 1,000 different things. So I really wanted to kind of have one event in mind as I was talking about the planning and management of this. There are 5 core components of of the event, so the accreditation process that I always like to start with. And so it's the access and authority and identity of a credential program. Are you going to use visual or digital access control tools? What's your planning communication structure going to be like? What's your approval process? And then also, what will your printing and software will be? So the reason I want to start with the New York City Marathon, the TCS New York City Marathon is sort of the anchor example here, is it's just a big and complex event and has a lot going on. My goal is not to make this a case study of how to plan the New York City Marathon or how to plan their accreditation program, but I want to use it again as that anchor event to kind of bring back all the things I'm talking about and sort of some of the ways that this event, how these considerations are sort of very specific to this event, and then how you can take those considerations back to hopefully your event. I am sure throughout the program today, I will use the possessive voice. I will talk about we, us, my marathon. And that is because I actually used to work for the New York City Marathon full time for several years. So the New York City Marathon is owned by a nonprofit called NYRR, New York Roadrunners. I was a full-time staffer there from 2012 to 2016. I do not work for them any longer. I don't speak for them on this one. So I've come back most years since 2016 as a contractor and worked at the event in a couple different roles, a couple different capacities. But I know this event really well. I also had the good fortune to run it in 2016. So I also know it from the participant side of things. So that sort of gives me a very unique perspective in how this event, frankly, I just know this event better than any other event I've ever worked on because I've been working on it for so many years. I am also 100% biased. I love this event. I think it's the best marathon out there. And I have a lot of really good friends and colleagues from my time at New York Roadrunners and folks who are still there. So that's really why I kind of wanted to focus on this event, that sort of anchor concept. To give a little bit of an overview about the credential program for this event. So the event has about 15,000 staff and personnel that are working the event. It has about 50,000 runners. We're not going to talk at all about runners today. That's a whole different conversation. But we're going to focus on sort of the staff and media and vendors and city agencies and all the folks and volunteers and all the folks that come to kind of bring, help produce this event. So if you're not familiar with this event, it is in New York City. So it starts in Staten Island. All 50,000 runners get shipped out to an island, and then they run through all 5 boroughs and end in Central Park. For those, marathon is 26.2 miles. I forgot to double check what that is in kilometers. Sorry, I'm gonna use the old imperial units over here. So it's a very long event. And with the start and finish, those are really the more secure areas. The course, just by nature of being 26 miles in New York City, it's a very different component. So it's a huge event that we are trying to manage security and access control to. And so we do it in a variety of different levels with a variety of different tools. So for the credential program for this event, we actually end up with it's a very traditional credential. It's going to be the piece of plastic hanging around your neck on a lanyard. On them, we include first name and last name. We include the group name that you're a part of, and also a photo image, and then a matrix of zones that grant you access to different areas. I would love to show an example here, but I preach don't post credentials on social media. So I didn't want to post one from 10 years ago because that's something I want to live by what I say. But again, if you've ever been to a major event, you probably have a pretty good idea of what that credential looks like. It's very much in the world, the standard world of credentials. Most of the credentials are individually assigned, that we make assignments based at the person level. And then everyone gets a credential as part of a group. So we do have a couple different mechanisms to control people at the individual, group, and department level within the program. We actually have over a dozen different credential types. Credential type can be something like staff or media or a medical or a volunteer. So those are really sort of an identity component. And then we have about a dozen or so zones that get mapped out for the entire event. So some are at the start, some are at the finish. Some are very secure and very limited number of people going in, some are in small locations, like maybe a tent. And then some are, the entire start area, which is actually pretty expansive. So we do have a variety of different zones that have different components, different scopes and scales to them. And we even have one area that requires a background check from a city agency for staff to access. So there's another level of component there, another level of complexity there. It is a really, actually, I just skipped over one thing. We also do have some lower level security areas that actually get generic credentials. So those are credentials that don't have a name or a picture on it. We're able to sort of assign those a little bit more easily, a little bit more broadly. And so those are areas like on the course that just don't have the same security protocol that you're going to have at the start and the finish, just by nature of being, throughout 26 miles of New York City streets. It is a pretty complex accreditation program. It certainly does create some challenges with communication because of that nature, but that complexity has grown over time to meet the various needs that we have as we're trying to design and execute this program. And so this presentation is going to be about some of those considerations and how we think about them to design a holistic program, and then again, think about how these considerations apply to your event and how you can use them. So I just want to give a little bit of a snapshot of the event itself. And so with the core consideration, sort of core components of the accreditation program, again, it's going to be that access and authority and identity, the visual and digital access control, planning and communication, as well as the approval process, and then printing and software. The reason I wanted to kind of pause on this or kind of come back to this one more time is that these aren't things that can be planned in a silo. They very much should be thought of as being very interwoven with each other, that if you're making decisions on one, that will have an impact on another. If you decide to make decisions and plan a couple of these out, 6 months before the event, and then finally, 1 month before the event, decide to make some big changes on another couple programs or sit down and plan them for the first time, they're not going to link and connect as well as you want them to. These all have impacts on other components, in this accreditation program. And I really do encourage everyone to think of these, just again, as a holistic program that all needs to be planned in concert together to make sure that they do work the way that you need them to and in the way that you want them to. So to dig into a little bit about the sort of the overall program goals are really going to be about how you want your credential program to manage your access and identity and authority, for your event. This can dramatically differ from event to event. So this is really, how do you want to manage your stakeholders? Who are your stakeholders and what do they need out of the accreditation program as well, and how you want to manage them on site. So any accreditation program actually has a variety of different stakeholders are going to be there. You will have staff and vendors, sponsors. You might have pro athletes, city agencies, industry guests, VIP, media, emergency response personnel, talent, volunteers, medical staff. The list goes on and on and on. They all have different expectations about how to interact with security and access control in an event. And so I do believe it's worthwhile you do need to take into the consideration all of their different perspectives as you design and build this. And so really the goal of any credential system is, from the event producer side of things, is you want to define the areas you want to control access to and how you want to control it. You want to identify who people are and where they can go, and you need a system that can group and manage them in a way that allows you to sort of effectively control and manage that access and identity for folks in a very cohesive way. And do you want to define, what, if any, authority any of those folks have with a credential? I do think authority is one of the trickier parts of accreditation, and oftentimes I'm seeing it less and less kind of used as a component of event management, and really kind of. So I'll probably spend a little more time talking about access and identity here, but knowing that authority is certainly a part of a credential program, or can be a part of a credential program. Other considerations will also come up with a credential program is you might need to be planning across multiple days. There might be pre and post event work site that you need to deal with. You might need to manage crew meals, or potentially payroll or staff check-in can also be based off of accreditation. But again, those are another layers of complexity that I'm probably going to leave a little bit off today, but they are worth considering of how your accreditation program can kind of meet the needs there. So with access and identity, it's really about how granular of a control you want over where people can go, and how detailed do you want to be about the person who has that credential. These two are very much intertwined throughout the entire kind of accreditation program. And so the more specific you are with identity, the more specific you can be with access control. And the more complex you need to gather data on an individual, the more complex the application and communication process is also going to be here. So they kind of go hand in hand. And again, not every event has to have the most complex accreditation program. Sometimes a very simple accreditation program can work for the event. It's about determining what the needs of the event are, and then sort of what the timeline is, how much resources you have to put into it, sort of how you want to manage it, and balancing out all of those different components for your event. There are a few mechanisms you can manage access. You can do that by the role that someone has. You can do that by the credential type that someone has. You can do that by the group that someone belongs to. And you can also do that at the individual level of just, who John versus Mike, they can go different places if you want to assign it, at that level. Again, the more detailed you are with the individual assignment, you can also then, detailed with the individual identity on the credential, you can also then start to be more detailed with the zones that you have and to assign to folks, and how you can control those two together. So an accreditation program can be as complex or as simple as it needed. Sometimes you need a basic generic credential that you give out to everybody just to differentiate staff from attendees or staff from the general public. That works fine in a lot of instances. It's certainly easier to implement. It's more cost effective, but it does give you a little bit less control at the event. But if that's what the event needs, then that's an absolutely fine approach to take for it. You can also add a couple different levels of generic credentials. You can have some that go to staff, some that go to media, talent, or VIP. You can differentiate folks based on the group that they are in, very broadly speaking. And that gives you another mechanism, another level of control for folks. If that's still not enough, you can even do generic credentials, but assign to a group. So you might have company XYZ or company ABC. Maybe one of those companies needs 20 and then one needs 50, and you need them to go to different places. Adding in that group level can also help you identify and another level of control and detail you can provide, and so you can manage who can go where. Really, after that group level, you really start to get into individual names on folks and determining who's going to go where. That starts to take a lot more time, really, to collect all that information, to manage it, process it, and approve it, and make sure the right assignments are getting to the right people. Whether you're doing names, photos can also be another layer of security that you can add into a credential. And that really does start to increase the complexity of the credential system you're going to need. I think it's very doable. I think it's something that I think is worthwhile doing, but it does add a lot to the credential program. When it comes to zones, some events need 2 or 3 zones. Some events need more than a dozen or more. That's okay. You can have as many as you need for your event. That complexity, you can have a lot of zones and then still very broad ways to kind of group and manage folks for credentials, and that can work as well. Or you might want to have very individual identity information on a credential, but just a couple zones to work with. It's really just what the event needs that you have and how you need to apply that for your event. What I typically see is the successful combination is just it's a mixture of all. It's a blend of all these different things. So having a matrix of zones, individual assignment, various credential types, and then even some generic credentials for lower level security areas can all be an absolutely fine way to approach it. There's not a one size fits all, and certainly one size doesn't necessarily fit every single group that you're going to be interacting with. So you can actually think about the security controls for your event in very different ways. Access and identity, again, I think I said, are a little bit more easily controlled with accreditation. Authority is that little bit tougher part to do. And so some of the most common ways, sets of authority I've seen, with credentials are going to be escort privileges and even show-stop procedures. I do think the show-stop procedure in the industries has gotten a lot more attention in the last couple of years, which is very much a good thing. And so there might be a whole program that exists outside of the credentials that sort of cover that. But escort privileges are one thing I still think I see a lot of with credentials. And so that can be the ability to bring someone else into a zone that doesn't have that zone on their credential is what I mean by escort privileges. That can be a tricky one. It's a great tool to have, but it can also be overly used sometimes at events. So again, that's when I'm thinking about authority, that's sort of what I'm thinking of with a credential. Again, there's no one right answer to any of this. Every event's going to be a little bit different and sort of in how they approach it. All right, so we're going to move on to visual versus digital access control here. And I am going to leave off of digital. You could go one step further and talk about biometric access control. Again, I'm going to leave that off to the side here because I don't think that's still as common at events. But there are starting to be some companies that work on facial recognition for attendees. And I think it'll just be a matter of time before we start to see that for accreditation as well. And again, if you wanted to really talk about biometric, you can also get into voice recognition, fingerprints, retinal scans. But now we're kind of delving into Hollywood spy movie territory. Again, I'm not seeing much of that at events these days, but give it time and we'll see where that lands. So when I talk about visual versus digital access control, so visual control, I'm really thinking of sort of the traditional credentials. So whether it's credentials, lanyards, wristbands, vests, uniforms, lapel pins, stickers, or employee badges, those are the common tools that you'll see with a visual control. There are two forms of auditory control. It's my guys know who to let in, and I know a guy. Those are the two most common ones that I see here. Not a fan of either of those. I don't think that's the way to run a good program. I do think everything should be visual should top auditory control here when it comes to credentials. Some of the common tools that we're talking about with digital access control, it's really going to be a QR code or a barcode, whether that's on a paper ticket, it's on a phone, some sort of event app, or on the credential itself. Those two codes can provide a lot of digital information scanning for it. And then also an RFID wristband or credential can be another sort of common way. Starting to see a lot more RFID access control in events. There's a lot of pros to it, some cons as well. But we'll sort of jump into some of those right now. With a visual credential, some of the pros and cons is that one of the things I like the most about a visual credential is that it's available at all times. It's visible at all times. So not just at the entry points of an event, but inside the space that someone's in, you can see if that person's supposed to be there. If it's on, lanyard on with a credential around someone's neck, it's permanently visible. And I think that's a really big thing that shouldn't be overlooked for security. I do think large events aren't always as secure as we would like to think that they are. There's especially when you're outdoor events in public spaces. Sometimes security can be a little more porous than we would like to admit. It's not a criticism of security guards and security companies by any way. It's just a really, really difficult job. And so I think that having that access control, that visual access control when someone's in a space, I've also found to be very helpful, and not just thinking of security access or security at entry points and access points, but also within the space that someone's in. I do think that someone having a credential with their name and photo and their group name on it is also a really great way to hold people accountable. If you have staff who are in a space where they're not supposed to be, it's nice to know who that staff person belongs to in terms of who they work for, what their company is. That can be a really good tool to enforce, if there's any other issue, if you are having issues with staff on site. I think some of the other pros with visual control is that it's relatively simple to set up. It's familiar. There's no technical training. You don't have additional technology you need to set up. There's no additional technical failures. It's pretty cost effective, and it provides a lot of information to the folks who are wearing it. Some of the cons with this is it does really require diligent security at those entry points. It doesn't provide them the security guards a tool to help them support their entry or denial of folks. It really is sort of on a person by person level, and that can be a very difficult job for security guards, especially when they're dealing with sort of high profile people, whether it be VIPs or city officials or senior folks from organizations. That can be difficult for security guards. So there's a big benefit to them having some sort of digital tool to help them with their access. Forgery is always a potential. It just is. Credential boards can also be time consuming to create. There can be some complexity in communicating who can and can't enter an area. And then credentials are a single use plastic tool with all the environmental implications that come along with that. One of the other downfalls is you don't actually have any access to data at the end of the event. It's all just sort of on site. It happens in real time. And so that information, there's no information gathering piece with just a visual access control tool. And then also they can be easily transferable to another person. And that's also one of the security vulnerabilities of a standard credential. With digital control, you do have some different pros and cons naturally with it. They still function very much the same. You're still setting up your zones. You're still assigning people to go to those different zones. But I think the biggest thing you get is data. That data can be looked at in real time, looked at in post-event to figure out who's going where. And that can be really invaluable information to your event to plan for next year, to really see where things are sort of in real time. You can also, with digital control tools, you can also use time and date-based access to certain points. That can be really beneficial for a multi-day event or for pre and post access. RFID can also allow for point of sale integrations. You can make updates on site a whole lot easier as well. It's a little bit more difficult to forge, but not impossible to forge as well. And so some of the cons that come along with digital control is that it might not be as visible to security when someone's in the space. A wristband, if it falls underneath someone's sleeve, if they have a long sleeve shirt, you can't see it. It's not as visible. It's a little bit harder to manage sort of inside the space, but it can be more effective at the access point itself. Forgery is harder, but not impossible. You also have more technology, which more equipment, more technicians. That cost is a little bit higher. Your material costs are going to be a little bit more. There certainly are some benefits. RFID is not cost prohibitive. If that's something that you need, I think it's really worth considering for an event. But it does have some more additional costs that come along with it. And frankly, they're still single-use items. So there is still sort of an environmental impact that always comes along with any of the tools that we have here. Probably the most environmentally friendly one is going to be things that are mobile phone based, because you don't have to produce anything. Most everyone has a smartphone at this point. But again, I think the downfall of that is that it lives inside the pocket. It's a lot harder to see when someone's in that space. But a mobile phone is certainly an option for access control tools. My recommendation on this is really, again, look at your event. What does your event need? But there are ways to do this in sort of a hybrid approach. So security and access control is different for different sites throughout the event. Everything doesn't have to be RFID. You can do a mixture of generic credentials and individual credentials and some credentials with RFID chips in them going to certain higher level security events. So you can really manage and sort of control those costs, or as best you can. That if you have 20,000 people coming to an event that need credentials, maybe only 5,000 of them need RFID, and maybe only 10,000 of the additional folks need to have an individual credential. So you can mix and match generic credentials, individual RFID tools, or digital tools. All the different things you can do can help you make that matrix of control for your event in a way that really works for you and is effective for you. All right. Just going to get a little bit into the planning and communication now. One of my big recommendations is start earlier than you think. 4 to 6 months for an accreditation program for a large event is not too long. I've done them in a couple of weeks. It's usually not the best. It's not the smoothest process in the world. You certainly can do these very shortly with short notice, but 4 to 6 months for a major event is really where you should start having the conversations and starting to think about all these different components. I really do think that planning communication is the key to success here over top of anything else. This is really what is going to make or break the success of that credential program. Credential programs are pretty hard to salvage at the 11th hour. I've tried. It's not great. It's not the most fun, but it is something that they are hard to get back on track if they've gone sideways. And a credential program can feel fine until it doesn't. It's not a slow, hey, things aren't going well. Everything like if you haven't done the proper planning, haven't done the proper organization, everything will feel fine until really you get to distribution week. And that's when you'll start to notice that, hey, things are not good. People don't have the information they need. People haven't submitted what they have, and you don't have a lot of time to fix it. And so it can break. And when it does so at the last minute. It doesn't do it, 3 or 4 months early. So I do very much encourage to move the planning as far and as early in the process as you possibly can. It will benefit you in the long run for sure. So with designing a program, I do think that department level input is really important. I don't advocate for just a couple people sitting in a room and trying to map out what the accreditation program should be. I don't think it always takes into account what all the stakeholders are going to need. And so I think it's worthwhile to sit down with all the departments from last year, talk about what their pain points were, what they need, what's new for this year, gather that feedback, bring it back together and develop the program from there. I've sat and had the same meeting 18 times with 18 different departments before. It's definitely time consuming, but I think it goes a long way into building the relationship that your accreditation team needs with the entire organization to effectively manage and communicate this entire process, because it's not just one meeting and then you don't talk to them again. You need to have an established relationship within the entire organization to really deliver a great and seamless program. I also do think that internal support is very much needed from the top down. If credentials are sort of seen as just is an add-on that is not truly a core component of the event, you won't get you won't get the buy-ins you need from folks. And so I do think having this champion from the top down can go a long way. And then when you end up with better results, when department managers and area leads know how important, how serious it is, and how this affects their operational planning. And then really an accreditation team needs internal allies at the event to make it go smoothly. Particularly when we're dealing with external stakeholders, we'll really need those internal folks to help us sort of get the results that we want from those external folks. Training and training and information. I believe it should be comprehensive and targeted. It's very difficult to talk to 15,000 people, but you can talk to 500 different groups. And so I've built out robust training programs before that can really meet the needs of all the different groups and departments coming in. Sometimes it's really hard to speak to the individuals, when there are that many. But if you build out a robust training program, I think really you're going to need more than a one-pager. But also if you write a novel about credentials, no one's going to read it. And something is being honest with ourselves about how do people learn and how do they incorporate information into what they need to do when our industry is known for being pretty busy at times. So how do you get people the information they need when they need it in the way that they're going to receive it? So I believe that training should be multimodal. You can do training webinars and office hours. It needs to be easily searchable. I built out whole training websites for events before, pictures and videos. And it really just being available and be able to answer questions for folks, because you want that training to be searchable and manageable by the people who are using it. Because if someone sits down to fill out their credentials and they get stuck on something very simple early in the process, they're going to abandon it and they may not come back to it. So you want to make sure people can find the information they need to successfully complete the accreditation process the way that you want them to. I also believe in a security first, but not security only approach to credentials. So again, it's a multi-stakeholder approach. Safety and security should be the primary driver of accreditation, but I believe you do need to take into account the operational needs and attendee experience of all the folks who are going to be on site, because if that's not included, if they don't feel like they're brought along on that build and they have some say in the process, you're not going to get their buy-in, and you do need their buy-in to be successful. I also admit my bias. I have an operational background, not a law enforcement background, and so I think that this operational experience is valuable in the accreditation program planning, because you need people to understand how it's going to affect them on event day, and then how can the entire organization being a part of the accreditation program, how can those perspectives also help make this beneficial to them, and they can see how it will benefit them, but that takes time to do. And so you can have the best security plans, the best tech, the best guards, but if the program isn't well managed, if it isn't taken seriously by the people, by the client, the folks who are working working with us to deliver it, you won't get the results that you really want on site. And this takes time to get that buy-in from groups. But if their concerns are heard, people are more likely to come along with you on that. But that just does take time and effort, and you can't do that over the course of 6 weeks. You need a couple months to work on it. Another bias I have on this on building accreditation programs is have your accreditation manager do a first draft of what you think you're going to need. Have them talk to all those stakeholders, bring that information in. Your accreditation manager will be thinking of all the different elements that we've discussed today and bring that into a first plan. Of course, have the safety and security team stress test that plan, but start with a comprehensive plan, not a patchwork of ideas that are sort of developed and built as you go along. That's when you really lose that cohesive component to it. And so I put a lot of work on that accreditation team to come up with that first approach. I do think that credentials and accreditation programs needs to be viewed as part of the security plan and protocols for the event. It needs to be a non-negotiable for everyone who's participating in the event. It's not an administrative task. It's not customer service. It needs to be a fundamental part of the security protocols that vendors and partners are required to engage with. I do also believe, when possible, make this a contractual obligation. Work accreditation into your vendor contracts, that they must engage with it in the timeline that's outlined by the accreditation team. And that's where accreditation team that's really sort of embedded within the organization, we can be talking to your legal department and your finance team and your procurement team about the implications of all of this, but use all the leverage you have, particularly with external stakeholders, to get them to comply with the accreditation program. And they need to know that it's something that you as an organization, you as an event, take seriously. And again, I do believe in sort of embedding your credential team within your larger organization. You'll get a lot more out of us if we are able to work across your organization and not just in a small committee. When we're integrated with an entire operation, we can support each department. We can flag concerns or issues that we're having with vendors to them. We can also answer questions to them more quickly, but we need to have that relationship with those folks, with the folks in all those different departments. That takes time, but I think it's time well spent. Handle the exceptions as exceptions. I think design a program that meets most of the needs you have for most of the core standard function you have, and then keep your exceptions as exceptions. Have rules to plan to handle them and to address things that fall outside of the parameters, and try not to make your handle your exceptions sort of ad hoc. You'll know what a lot of those are ahead of time, and then as you work on an event for year after year, you start to learn what those are. Again, the more integrated you are with the entire organization, you'll also hear about some of those exceptions earlier on, and you can have an intelligent plan and communicate with the right people to figure out what the right solution is. That's a lot easier than finding out, 2 days before the event when you can't get a hold of anybody and you have to make a decision. That integration with the larger organization makes a huge difference on how to deal with these sort of unique cases and how you want to handle them, so that they are handled in the way that security wants and that the organizing committee wants to have happen. Exceptions are not excuses. I don't believe that if a vendor doesn't want to engage with the credential process just because it's too much work, that's not an exception. That's just an excuse. And so there are things that are going to live outside the bounds, but still it needs to be a requirement for vendors to do this. And they need to know that when they're signing up to participate in an event, and they want that paycheck, that final paycheck, that has to be engaging with the credential program needs to be a part of what they're expected to do, and not just an afterthought or an inconvenience to them. Yeah. And so, and with that planning communication, when our accreditation team, we can actually provide a broad range of benefits to the security program if we're speaking with everybody, at the organization. We can be connected to every single group. It's a great way to get messaging out on security protocols. It's a great way to get information coming in, and we can pass that along. And we can also help enforce things that seem that they're maybe out of bounds, or if there's a red flag here or there. If we know the organization and the event as a whole really well, we can provide more benefit to that. All right, I'm going to jump into the approval process, and watching the clock here, so I'm going to go a little bit quicker on these last two pieces here. So with the approval process, having the best laid out plans. If you're too permissive with access for events for different zones, you're just gonna have too many people going into the places that you don't necessarily want them to be. So one of the key components is the ability to say no when access is being granted. So you do really need a credential system that can support the access process, and that has to be designed at the start. You need to know how you want to approve, how many levels and layers, and who's going to be in the process. You need to know that early. It's not something we kind of tacked on at the end. You need to have a system that stakeholders know how to use. They need to be, informed of what the expectations are as well. They need to know, what the goals are with access control. If someone wants to just give everyone all access because that's easier, that's not the right person to be in that position. And so a credential system has to be able to support the complexity that you need with the credential program. For the who is doing that approval, sometimes that can be the credential team, sometimes that can be the client. Really, a mixture of both can work out really well. There are pros and cons for both sides. Sometimes the client doesn't have as much time or bandwidth because you're looking at a lot of things, and your credential team might have a little bit more bandwidth towards that, but we also might not know the event and the specifics as well. But there are ways you can design it so that the credential team has guardrails for doing some of the more simple, more basic approvals. We can keep some of that work off the plate of the client, and then folks that are requesting higher level security access or more complicated security access, that can then get looked at and reviewed by folks. But can the accreditation team take the sort of the bulk of the work off the plate of that client to make it a smoother process to keep the system sort of running and moving forward? And so again, it's a complicated balance there with how you want to approve credentials and who's going to do it. And sometimes some events will have a lot of people working on the credentials, working on the approvals, and some will have just a couple folks. Again, what are the needs of the event? What's that right balance there? I do think bandwidth is one of the key things that don't overestimate how much time someone's going to have to work on this. In the 2 or 3 or 4 weeks before the event. If you know someone's going to be swamped, it's worth having someone else who can make those decisions, so that credential program doesn't kind of just get bottlenecked because there's one person you're waiting on, and that person just has too many other things to do. That's something I do see sometimes at events, and can be a challenge. So again, you also need people who are comfortable saying no and trusted to say no. I think that's also a very big component about trying to manage the access. Do you have one layer of approval, or do you have multiple? Does a credential application get approved by one person, or do you need multiple levels of approval? I've seen some programs with up to 6 levels of approval before a credential is produced and printed. And I've seen some events where there's just one person that signs off, and that's all they need. Again, what's that right balance that your program needs, or your event needs to kind of balance everything? All right, we'll jump over to software and printing. So I've worked with a variety of different software platforms out there, and I worked with a variety of different printers out there. There are some that are really, really good, and some that are just kind of okay. But I will say about software and printing is that in your printers, these can have a big impact on the credential program in general. But great software, great printers won't make up for the other components that we've talked about here today. If those are not fully supported, then a good software program's not going to fix all the things that aren't being done, if they're not done, if that communication and planning, if the approval process isn't mapped out, if it's not well supported by the organization. No software can make up for those components. So certainly this is the last piece of the puzzle, if you will, but it cannot fix the rest of the program if that's not really there. So some of the things I really like to see in a credential program is something that doesn't take months to launch. It can't take 3 months to build your credential program. You need to have something that's customizable with the appropriate branding for the event, and the sponsors are there. You need to have multiple types of credential applications. You need to have a customizable set of zones for each group. I really like to see group portals so that a group manager can access and understand where their entire team's kind of credentials are and get a good snapshot of that. They need to be able to see what credentials have been submitted, what haven't. They need to see when they've been printed, if they've been picked up. There's a lot of information that need to get transferred out to group managers. They need to know what's happening with their entire team and not just submit the credential applications in a black box and they never see them again until they pick them up. Information needs to be a two-way street to make this successful. I will say one rule here that I do think is actually applicable across the board is don't do open applications. And by what I mean by an open application is it's a single link that's just sent out to everybody and everyone submits and types in their own group information. If you do that, I don't see that ever getting good data back to work with. If you ask 10 people what company they work for, you might get 8 different answers, different spellings. And really when information is getting put into a database, it needs to be organized and sorted well. So applications need to have the group sort of assigned to it. And then that unique application can be sent out to that one specific team. I like to see a credential system that can handle communication, actually sending emails and rejections out to folks. You need to have a document upload feature. Group managers, can they have access to last year's records? That can be very helpful for them. And there's a lot of different technical tools and things in there. But again, your credential system is the final piece of the puzzle. It's certainly not the solution to all of your needs. Recognizing time, I'm going to go really quick on these last 3 points. So on-site printing and off-site printing. Offsite printing is when sort of the background image is printed on the credential. That is then at an offsite print shop. That's then shipped to the site, and then you can print variable data on the front. So you can still so it's sort of really a combination of both on-site printing and offsite printing. It gets great imaging. You have more stock options, badge stock options and material options to work with. You can do some additional security features like foil stamps and holograms. It does take a lot more time to do. There's a lot more complexity. There's more vendors involved, more shipping, more chances for delays. And I think one of the biggest things about is offsite printing is you actually have a fixed number. If you order 5,000 credentials and you need 5,000, you need to print 5,001, you have no way to print that last credential. You are very much fixed by what you have, by what you order. The alternate of that is if you print 5,000 credentials and you only need 4,000, you've now printed 1,000 credentials that you're not going to use. I'm actually personally a fan of on-site printing. I think there's some really great solutions out there these days that prints the entire credential on-site. It gives you much more control over the timeline and approvals and reviews and test prints. That's all done by your accreditation team in-house. So it doesn't take days to get a proof back. You can get a proof back in a couple of minutes. So it gives you, again, flexible timeline and testing, fewer production variables, and your inventory management is, again, much more flexibility with that. If we need to bring 10,000 credentials to a site, or we think we're going to print 10,000 credentials, I'll bring 12,000 to the site. And then we have a buffer of how many more we need. And we can always order more credentials to have them shipped in if need be. We have a lot more flexibility with that. Printers do have come in sort of two main variables for credentials. It's ribbon and inkjet. My preference is ribbon printers. I think inkjets tend to be a little bit sticky because it lays down a layer of ink over top of the credential, and I've seen some challenges with that. But I tend to be a fan of the ribbon printers. You can also pre-print all the backs if you're doing the printing on site yourself, so you don't have to print those. When you're on site printing the fronts, you can actually print them well ahead of time, so you can kind of manage your timeline a little bit better there. And then it's just, again, I love that flexible inventory management. last component, again, recognizing time, pardon, is distribution. What level of distribution security is right for your event? Do you need to have everyone show an ID to pick it up? Or are you allowing group pickup? Do you allow proxy pickup where someone can pick up for another person? There's a variety of different ways you can manage that. Again, it's what sort of works well for your event and your timeline. I will say that with an accreditation office, don't make this an afterthought. Sometimes we're the very first location that someone experiences for your event. If they're picking up their credential first with us before they even get on site to the event, we're their first kind of touch point with that event, particularly when you're dealing with VIPs and other industry personnel. You want to really show that this piece of the event is where they get to see all the branding and the maps and the information they get to see and make it look really cool. Sometimes we're just sort of put off in a corner, and totally get it. Sometimes there's not a budget for branding and making that credential office look great, but I think there's a benefit to doing so. Also, do you need to have satellite offices? How are you managing who's picking up credentials where? Is pickup time controlled? And then how you want to handle reprints and upgrades and changes. You can map a lot of that out early on if you have a thorough plan, but there will always be changes that are needed. And so defining what the guardrails are for the accreditation team to make a decision right then and there to solve a problem, versus having to kick it back to the client to try to track someone down to make a decision. What can we take off of your plate? What's within the boundaries of you're comfortable with? And then what do we need to kind of run up the chain of command for a more thorough decision? And again, if we are embedded well, if the accreditation team is embedded well with your organization, we know who to call to get an answer right away. The most frustrating thing we can do is send someone away. That's a terrible experience for that person. They came to pick up their credential and it's not ready for whatever reason, and they have to come back again. Sometimes it takes a lot of time to travel to the accreditation office, wait in line, and then they walk away without the thing that they were hoping to. That's a really frustrating experience. And that's where, if we can provide a better service to that person, they're going to appreciate that. They're also the folks who are going to be delivering your event for you. And so you don't want that to be a friction point for folks. You want the credential process to make people enjoy working at the event and want to be there and know that it's run smoothly and organized well. And so that can be a really good experience, or it can be a very frustrating experience. It's just how well it's planned. All right. I think that is everything for me today. I know that was a lot. Thank you for bearing with me.
Rob, thank you so much. Yeah, huge amount of information in that. And I'd imagine, judging from our conversations offline, you could probably even say that you have enough information to fill a whole other webinar on it. It's a really robust topic, isn't it?
Yeah. There's certainly a lot to it. I love talking about this. Happy to continue the conversation with the folks, offline if they have any more questions, but would love to jump into questions if there are any right now. Yeah, well, one has actually just come in here. We've got a question from Phil. He says, what are your thoughts when an event is held at a venue that already has an accreditation system in place, but it doesn't cater for additional event staff and stakeholders? He says, try to work with both systems running alongside each other, try to integrate the two systems, or have the event system supersede the venue system. Appreciate every event is different, but what's your experience around this and possible solutions? Yeah, no, that is an absolutely great question. I will say again, I'll admit the bias on this one. I like the event system to supersede the venue system itself. I worked on a handful of events like this where there is sort of a day-to-day operations and you have employee badges. Those just are really not going to correspond to the event needs. It does take a lot of time to integrate and work together, but if you have your event accreditation program supersede that venue one, you can still bring all the venue staff and print them credentials. It's usually not a deal breaker. You will likely meet some resistance from folks that they have to go through another process. It feels like it's more admin work for them, but that then comes into that relationship building with that venue, making it as easy as you can for them so that they want to participate in this and they need to know why they need to participate with this. But having two concurrent programs, I do think, is a recipe for some challenges that you'll introduce on site if you have two different things, because it's just so much more complicated for your security guards on site to manage, and whether they are venue security versus event security. you're going to create conflict if you have two competing systems. So I do think the event system should supersede.
Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to pop them in. Also, something you said in one of your last slides there, you were talking about needing to have someone with the ability to say no to access controls.
Yeah.
And of course, we had spoken offline when we were talking about this topic, and you mentioned that there's a question about eliminating all access. Do you think there's mostly positive, mostly negative, or kind of arguments for both for eliminating access all areas?
Yeah, no, that's a great topic. I will say this is my hobby horse. We don't need all access. I don't think it makes sense for annual events and live at greenfield sites. I think you can get away with not having it and still have all the functionality you need. If all access exists, people want it. It's just a status symbol. It just tells you that you've arrived. It is a thing that people want when they truly don't need it. Again, I'm going to use the New York City Marathon as an example. All access includes everything from the start to the finish. They're not 26 miles apart, but there are literally a handful of people who can physically go to all zones in one day. It's a rarity. Only a couple people need it, but we end up adding it to more people because it's a status symbol. And again, that's not to pick on the New York City Marathon. That happens at every event. But if you remove that as an access point to say, hey, it doesn't exist, then people are going to have to, they'll deal with that. They'll be okay with that. And you can still map out all of your zones to meet all the accreditation needs that you have so that everyone can get to where they need to go. But all access, I think at this point has become a status symbol. Again, for annual events, for one-day events, very, very different for tours and things with a longer time horizon. But I think I always suggest start with considering, can we eliminate all access, and then build from there. If you have to have it, by all means, add it back in. But start with that as the premise is that you don't actually need it. And you'll see it's actually still pretty easy. It's easier to build an accreditation program without it. And I think it really improves the on-site access management of folks if you don't have that there.
Fair. Yeah, 100%. It would be seen as a status thing. And as you said, if it's not needed for everyone there, if they don't have the option, then they're not even going to think about it themselves.
Yeah, their feelings won't be hurt by not getting it.
Exactly. Okay, well, I don't see any more questions coming in. And I know we've just gone past it depends on whatever time zone you're in, but here at 2:00. So I'm sure people have meetings and everything to get back to. Rob, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. For everyone watching, if you do want to have a look back over everything, I'll have this up on the Safe Events YouTube on Friday. And of course, as you've seen there, Rob has his contact details if you want to get in touch with him personally to ask any more questions. So Rob, thanks a million. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope your cough gets better.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. Everyone have a great day. I really enjoyed speaking with all of you. Thank you again, Chrissy.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.